time to time. I, as always, felt those yesterdays. I was sitting at the ball field watching Bethany play ball, and sure enough, I look around and I realize that I am by far the oldest parent around. As a matter of fact, I'm older than some of the grandparents there. It's kind of scary when you look around and you talk to the other parents, and you find that your children are older than they are. But today's one of those days when I'm kind of glad I'm older. Even though I did make a terrible mistake this week. I told LaWanda this morning, called my brother for his birthday last Wednesday. Problem is his birthday's 9/11.
Oh, well, you were close.
And so just a week off. I just looked at the calendar and, my Alzheimer's kicked in there for a second, and I thought it was 9/11. And it's really sad because his birthday is not real hard to forget, given where it falls. But by the same token, at times, being a little older can be beneficial. And I found that especially to be true as I'm studying the scriptures. When I was younger, I studied the scriptures, and I looked at them, and I took things at face value. Didn't really delve real deeply or think real deeply about what was being said or what was being done. And now, as I go back and look at the scriptures, I have a different perspective a lot of times. I see things differently than I used to see them. And I like to think it's a deeper perspective, and I guess today you'll be able to judge for yourselves whether that's the case or not. I used to talk to preachers who would say, I haven't changed anything I preach or anything I teach in 25 years. And I finally realized, they needed to quit 25 years ago. Because if you're not changing, you're not growing. And you're not learning. And I like to hope that as long as I have enough mind to understand what I'm thinking, that I'm going to continue to grow and I'm going to continue to learn. And one of the sections of scriptures that this week I was looking at and kind of saw from a different perspective just a little bit is in Matthew chapter 16. You'll remember this section of scripture. It's shortly after Jesus has fed the 5,000. And the disciples don't really understand. And he begins to speak unto them and ask them the question, who do the people say I am? Who do they say the Son of Man is? And you know the standard answers the disciples gave him. Some said, well, you're Isaiah, you're Elijah, you're one of the prophets. Maybe you're, And he said, yeah, okay, but who do you say I am? And Simon Peter's answer is recorded for us in verse 16. When he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood is not revealed unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto them the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he charged the disciples that they should tell no man he was Jesus the Christ. But you just explained to your disciples who you were, and then you tell them, but it's a secret. Don't tell anybody else. What's going on here? I don't quite get it. I think it's because of what takes place starting in verse 21. Jesus changes what he's going to say. He changes the very focus of what his disciples had believed his ministry to be about when he explains to them why he's really here. At this point, his disciples think he's here to build a kingdom. He's here to be a great teacher. He's here to reform Judaism is what they think he's here for. But when he tells them what he's actually here for, the disciples are literally floored. Verse 21. From that time forth, Jesus began to show to his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. Can you imagine the shock and awe of such a declaration? And the great detail that he made that declaration in. Peter's not going to have any part of this, is he? It's just, Peter says, no, it's not happening on my watch. It's amazing, too, when you look at Peter, just a moment before that, he's the one who speaks up. And he says, you're the Christ. You're the Son of God. And then when Jesus tells him what's going to happen, not what may happen, what could happen, what's going to happen, Peter says, no, it's not. I'm not going to let it. And Peter began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord. This shall not be on thee. I mean, what Peter do? Peter's telling God, you're wrong. He told God, you're wrong. And Jesus says unto Peter, get you behind me, Satan. And that if thou art an offense to me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, and those that be of men. We said all this to set this up. When Jesus talks about what it means to be his disciple. Notice what he says. If any man will come after me, if you're going to be one of my disciples, Peter, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to deny yourself. You're going to have to lay down something. That pride, that arrogance, that willingness to stand up here and say, no, Jesus, this is not going to be the way it is. You're going to have to let go of what you think should happen. Boy, as I started thinking about that this week, and I started thinking about what it would mean to lay down ourselves, to really deny ourselves for Christ, I realized how terrible a job most of us do. To lay down our own lives, to actually get to the point that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 6, when he talks about how just as Jesus died in verse 11, so also are we to reckon ourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. What gets me about this, and this is what I had never really thought about as we look at this. Jesus takes the very situation, the very sacrifice that he has to make, that he's going to be giving for us. And he is going to use it as a metaphor and a figure of the sacrifice that we have to give back to him. Jesus denied himself completely when he came to this earth. As the scriptures say, he came and he emptied himself. He gave his use of the powers of God for a time on this earth, and he became man. I know there's a lot of semantics among some brethren about this, but let's put it as simple as this. Jesus was a man. He was a man in every way you can be a man. And I don't think we realize how big a sacrifice that was. I can't even begin to imagine being there in creation and speaking the world into existence and being born and laid in a manger in a time when most children didn't even live. Growing up and living as a child and as a young adult in this world that he found himself in. And subjugating himself to the Father's will of doing so. Denying himself. Just as he expects us to deny who we are to be his people. To be his followers. We are to be like him. To subjugate ourselves unto him. Just like he was willing to subjugate himself to the Father. And to give up whatever he had to give up to do the Father's will. And that's where we have our problems, isn't it?
Yeah.
To give up whatever we have to give up to do his will and to be his followers. We cannot, as Paul says in the Roman letter, chapter 13, in verse 14, make no provision for the flesh, that our spirit might follow after Christ. We are to be a spiritual being, dead unto sin and alive unto Christ. And to do so, we've got to follow that example of Jesus as he was telling his disciples how he was going to die. He says, first thing for that to happen is we got to deny ourselves. Secondly, notice with me, he says, he must deny himself and take up his cross. I think we've got that figure all wrong. When we think take up our cross, we think, oh, there's some burden we've got to bear. That's not what taking up our cross is. That's not at all what taking up our cross is. It's not having to get up on Sunday morning and come to church at 8 o'clock when we could sleep in. Or maybe y'all don't have to get up at 8 o'clock. We do. But it's not having some project or some work that you have to do. Taking up your cross is just like Jesus took up his cross. That's the metaphor here. And by taking up his cross, Jesus subjected himself to death. He subjected himself to death. That's taking up your cross. It's not simply a burden to be borne. It is a giving up this life of sin and self and hanging that on the cross for Jesus, for Christ. And then finally, and this again, he says you've got to take up that cross and then follow me. How do you follow him? He tells us in verse 25. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. In the 12th chapter of the book of John, we have recorded Jesus' teaching on how we are to follow him. If I can get these pages to not stick together. There we go. I don't know whether there's pages or my fingers. He says, verse 26, if any man serve me, let him follow me. And where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. I think there's an interesting metaphor again right there, isn't there? When he says, Jesus says, where I am, there will my servant be. He's talking about a way of living, a lifestyle, a following after his sacrifice, his love, his giving, his being, that one who gave himself for us. Can we do that? Must we do that? Again, I find this passage in Matthew 16. Now, I'm not going to take a whole lot more of your time because I don't want to talk you to death. I want you to think. Think about what Jesus is saying here in this context. Remember the context. Remember when he's saying this. He's saying this at a time when he is revealed to his disciples the very first time that he's going to go, he's going to be punished, he's going to be beaten, he's going to be crucified, he's going to die, and he's going to do it for them. It's the very first time the disciples are hearing this. Now and then he says, because of that, this is how you're supposed to live. This is a symbiotic relationship between the two. They've got to be together. If we're going to be his followers, then we've got to follow his example in this too. We've got to be willing to sacrifice ourselves. We've got to be willing to be hung upon a cross for him. Obviously, that's not literal, though it could be. It has been in the past. Things seem to indicate that it might be going that direction again someday. Probably not in our lifetimes, but we don't know. But are we willing to do that? Are we willing to give our life to Jesus in whatever way that and form that follows? Whether that be our money, whether that be our time, whether that be our effort, and especially our hearts. Are we willing to sacrifice that? Are we willing to pay the price necessary to be worthy of the price he paid for us? Think about it. I'm done. I don't have a lot more to say. Well, I always have more to say. I don't have a lot more to say, but right. I pray. Lord knows this is one of those things where it's almost a physician heal thyself thing.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is, this is something we all struggle with. Because this is something, I know, yes, Papa's talking. This is something that it takes a lifetime seeking after Christ, even to begin to be worthy of what he's done for us. Can we help you this morning anyway?